Welcome to the Connected Mom podcast. Motherhood is a really long journey. I've heard that from a lot of moms lately. And, it starts with an infant and it goes on through a lifetime. And here's what I know after raising 4 kids and now being a grandmother to 14, you can't do this journey alone. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We have a very special guest with us today. And I want to remind you that here on the Connected Mom podcast, we have conversations that are hopefully going to help you connect more strategically with God, more intentionally with God, and also more empathetically with your fellow moms and more intentionally with your child. So we're going to dive in today. My guest is Paul Gutacker, and he is, as I was reading his bio, Paul, you're really smart, right? You've got all these degrees. You're a historian from Waco, Texas. You've got your doctorate. You've got your master's. And you're probably wondering, what in the world is this guy going to say to us as moms? Well, here's what you need to know. Paul and his wife, Paige, have 4 children. He can relate to you. And he is sharing life with the Brazos Fellows, which I really want to have a conversation about that. It is not a hippie commune. It is a community that studies and prays and eats and discerns God's will together. But when he's not doing all the smart things, Paul loves sharing his favorite pastimes with his kids, cooking and fishing and reading and rooting for the Buffalo Bills. And they're my second favorite team. The Broncos come first, but a couple of my grandkids are obsessed with Josh Allen. So, there's that. I have a friend who knows Josh Allen. So anyway, I do love the Buffalo Bills. So Paul, welcome to the Connected Mom. And start by telling us how old your kids are and a little bit about your family.
Great. Thanks so much, Becky. I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation today, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, you say, man, you must be pretty smart. And I'll tell you what, you can feel pretty smart until you have a bunch of little kids, and then you don't feel like you're as smart as you thought you were. But our kids are wonderful. They range from 8 down to 7 months. So we've got James, our eldest, and then Marianne, and then Matthew and Joshua brings up the rear. So we're our hands are full and our hearts are full, and we're in the thick of it, doing life with a bunch of kids with lots of energy and lots of life.
Yeah, I love it. My husband and I had 4 children, and sometimes it was just wild. We all thought we knew what we were going to do as parents until we had kids. And then we realized we really don't know what we're doing at all. But it's a wonderful opportunity to press into the Lord. So, okay, first of all, what in the world is the Brazos Fellows? It sounds like a very intellectual group. What is...
Yeah, it's been such a joy to be part of this. So we got this fellowship going about 8 years ago now. We're in our 8th year, our 8th cohort. And we realized that when we talked to college students and folks who are coming out of the college years, that there was just this real hunger to find some support as they navigated post-college life. For a lot of 20-somethings, it's that first moment where you're not in the structure of your family anymore, but you're also not in the structured life that college provides. And so you're kind of just anything's possible. And lots of folks in these bridge years don't have a clear sense yet of what they're supposed to do. They don't have marriage or family yet. And so we just discerned that there was this real hunger to not go it alone, spiritually speaking, in those years. And out of that hunger, we created this year-long program where folks come to Waco and they take on a common rule of life, which just commits them to certain prayer practices and shared weekly dinners and studying scripture and the Christian tradition. And the hope is that this rhythm of working and praying in community, sharing time around the table, studying theology, that this will really be a way in which the Lord grows them and helps them discern his call on their life. And so that's what Brazos Fellows is. And you can see, when you look at the book, that in a lot of ways, the book just kind of tells that story and draws on some of what we've seen play out in this community.
Okay, so now let me ask you just a very raw and real question. We had Sunday dinner here at our house. We do that every week, and our adult kids come, and one of my daughters was saying, I feel like I should have people over that don't have kids. But then I think, do I want to expose them to the chaos? And how will they respond? So, okay, you have 4 little ones. How do these post-college students respond to all the chaos of 4 little ones?
It's never perfect, obviously, right? It's always a little crazy. But here's the thing we've realized, Becky, is that can be such a gift. There's a sense in which the ideal evening, of serious Christians, we've got a wonderful dinner and a clean home, and we have all this time for real sharing and deep conversation. And those are good things. But the Lord meets us not just in those moments where we've perfectly scripted and prepared everything. He meets us in the middle of the chaos. And I've just seen, Paige and I have seen this over the years, where inviting these young adults, they're mostly in their 20s. We get some in their early 30s. Some of them have families who come, but most of them are single. And, they come and they get to be part of this life with us. And if they had any illusion that, Christian family life is simple and straightforward and perfect, that gets busted pretty quick. But the gift of having them in our home, it's been a gift to our family. So our children and us get to welcome in these wonderful young folks and just do life with them. But it's also been a real gift to them. They get to see in the reality of day-to-day life, with messy tables and dirty floors and what's that sticky substance that I just stepped on? And, in the middle of that, the way in which God can still meet us. So honestly, I think it's putting children into the mix of that is always a blessing. It's always a blessing. It might not be the kind of blessing that we always want, but it's always a gift.
Yeah. And I think it's good going into it that you realize, like, your kids get used to having people in the house, and you're not putting a lot of pressure on them. Like, okay, you got to perfectly behave. I mean, most kids aren't going to perfectly behave during dinner. There's going to be spills, and maybe somebody's going to have a meltdown, and, all of that. But what's the benefit of living life in community? I mean, I really personally, I don't feel like you should try to be a parent alone, because it's too long of a journey and you need community around you. So talk to us a little bit
Right.
about that, Paul.
That's absolutely right. And I think there's mutual need and mutual giving, right? One of the curious things you see in the Gospels is that Jesus plays the role of guest, which is pretty wild, right? Because we tend to think of the guest as the person who has a lack, has a need, and the host is the person who has what they need. But here you have the Lord of the universe, the creator of everything, who shows up as a guest. And part of what that does is it actually gives a gift to the people who get the chance to welcome Christ in. And of course, this is a theme in Scripture. When you welcome someone, you welcome them in Christ's name. You entertain angels unawares. And so there's a real, we sometimes think of hospitality as giving, but it's also receiving the gift of the chance to do that, right? To have that ministry. So we need, I really do think that it is a gift to be able to give hospitality. And that's not perfect hospitality. That's not the cover of the magazine kind of thing. It's real life. Last night we had our Monday dinner with the fellows, and we were going to go get flu shots as a family beforehand. And you can guess how that went, right?
I have so many pictures in my head. Go ahead.
Well, let's just say that some of us got the shots and some of us did not. And And we got home late and there were tears and dinner was not quite ready. But we know these young men and women pretty well a month into our year with them. And they just came in the door and they helped set the table. And this is life. This is where we are. So it was a gift to us for them to show up and us to still have an evening together. And it's also, I mean, I can't tell you how much of a gift I think this is to young folks, right? So one of the things that I think keeps our young people feeling like they have to wait to get married and wait to have kids is I got to have my whole life figured out first before I could do that. Well, you know what? That's never going to happen. Like you're never going to get to the point where you're like, I got it all pegged. So there's just one of the things I think the church can do better at is to say, we need our young single adults, our 20 somethings, we need them to share life with Christian families, not because we've got it figured out, but so precisely they can see that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a hero to do this. And in that sense, the messiness of it is a real gift. Like, I think it makes plausible, hey, if I do this, it's going to be great. It's going to be hard and I'm not going to be alone. And I think that is such, it can relieve so many of the sort of fears and impediments that people have when they think about starting a family. So that's not why we do it. It's not like that's the reason we do it, but I think it's a really nice outcome of getting to invite them in.
So, how often do you get together with people and have them in your home then? Is it every night of the week? Is it once a week? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, with the fellows, our rhythm is a weekly dinner. And about 2 out of 3 weeks, we host that. The rest of the time, they actually rotate through our church and visit different families' homes, which is a really nice way of them getting to know other people and getting to sort of build community outside of the group. But we're hosting them probably 2 out of 3 Monday nights, and sometimes we invite them to help us cook, and sometimes they always help with dishes. And honestly, they leave our kitchen cleaner than when it was when they showed up. Usually, they're wonderful. But this is I don't want to make this sound like it's always amazing. Like there are times when it's hard. There's times when we're tired. But the consistency and the way that we can get to know each other deeply and share our stories and build this community, it's not going to happen if we don't gather around the table. That's just kind of what we've landed on.
So, some of our kids have a life group together, and they do it as families, and so they do. I think they do every other week, and they share a meal, and then the adults kind of have a conversation, around the Lord and something that they're learning. And the kids, so it's been interesting because now some of the kids are starting to get to be around 12, 13, 14. So they're leading the younger ones, so they've been put in, so they're doing life together. But one of the challenges that I hear, particularly from moms who seem a little more concerned about this than some of the dads, is that sometimes there's a difference in parenting styles, right? And so if you're trying to do community with other families, there can be challenges. Some are, spankers, some are not spankers, some are, timeouters, some are time inners, and whatever. So, what would you say to that?
Oh my goodness. Well, when I've totally figured out the grand theory of perfect Christian parenting, I'll write that book. Don't hold your breath. No, it's a real thing, right? And we get this in families too. I'm one of five. All of my most of my siblings have kids, and of course, we're not going to perfectly align on every single way we're trying to raise godly kids, right? And so, I mean, I think we got to have grace, and we've got to be willing to, like, I think what can happen in a community is if there's a real commitment to each other, and there's a commitment based on, I actually want to grow with you, then I think a healthy community can cultivate that we talk about things that are tough. We don't just pretend that there's nothing challenging here. And we've been part of a weekly dinner group that's just friends, so not the fellows, but we've been part of that for years, and it's taken different shapes. And you find that over the years, when you really can trust, like, hey, these people, I love them, they love me, nobody's going anywhere, that actually gives you the freedom to say, hey, this one thing is kind of hard, like, can we talk about it? And I think it's harder to do that if this is all temporary community that you can jump in and out of if you don't like what's going on. And that can actually, like, I get it. I get that sometimes we have to leave, but there's a real danger of when things get tough, we think, oh, well, this is not Christian community. I gotta pull back. When I think real community is always going to be a gift and a challenge. It's always going to have moments that rub, moments that are difficult. And the question isn't, are those going to come? The question is, what are we going to do when they come? Are we going to just pack up our toys and go home? Or is this a chance for us to grow in sanctification, for the Lord to work in us, to practice humility and love toward each other? And that's not easy. But I think if you don't have that commitment, community will just stay on the surface, and we'll just be doing surface level stuff.
I agree with you. And I think that that's a really important to bring up in this particular moment in history and in our culture, where if I don't like something, I can opt out. If I get tired of the music at my church, I can go to a church down the street, or, and I can, kind of phase in and out of friendships. And it's not that every friendship is going to be a lifetime friendship, but the friendships that are lifetime friendships, those are gold, and even if there are disagreements, I think that's the other thing in our culture. Sometimes we think, I can't be close friends with somebody maybe who's on the other side of the political aisle as me, or on the other side of different, but that's not biblical, right? I mean, we have friends all across the spectrum, and each person brings a gift to our life, and it helps rub us maybe towards holiness, right?
I think that's exactly right. There's a classic text on Christian community is the rule of Saint Benedict. He lived back in the 400s. He started a community of people who wanted to devote their life to God, and it went terribly. They actually tried to kill him. They
I
tried to
kind of
poison
love
him.
that it went terribly.
Yeah, yeah,
I think people
yeah.
need that encouragement
Oh,
sometimes. Go ahead.
totally. Yeah, yeah. So his followers were so unhappy they literally tried to poison him. And he ends up founding these monastic communities that really become the bedrock of the life of prayer in the Western Church for hundreds of years. And the little book, The Rule, is his guide to community. And it's a funny book. If you read it, it's very strange. It actually sounds pretty harsh, some of the rules. He's taking a much stricter rule for monks that already existed, and he's trying to make it more accessible. He's actually trying to make it so that you don't have to be heroic to live this way. It's a fascinating read, but one of the first things he says is that the worst kind of monk is not the hypocrite or the one who's just kind of weak. The worst is, he's got a fancy word for this. It's gyrovague, and it just means the one who bounces around from one place to another. The monk who pops in, is part of the community, and then when he doesn't like what's going on, he pops over to a different monastery. And Benedict says that means it's impossible for him to grow. It's impossible for him to grow, and he'll bring a lot of other people down with him. Now, the positive side of this is that stability is essential to real transformation. And that's a tough word for us to hear. It's tough to hear, though, too, because we crave that, and yet we live in a world of extreme mobility where everything's up for grabs, where you could always change your mind or go to a different church, like you said, change your job, change where you live. And that, the sort of ceaseless mobility and choice after choice, and we can always change our minds, that actually can work against sanctification and growth, I think, because we're never confronted with, this problem's not going away, the problem's probably in here, right? we're never confronted by that lifelong friend who knows us and trusts us well enough to say, hey, you need to hear this. Um, so I don't know what to do with that. Like, I read that in St. Benedict and I'm like, so what do we do? How do we become more stable?
I think we cultivate loyalty. I think for moms, like, I have a friend which we started praying together when our kids were toddlers. Huge gift to me. We now are both grandmothers, but we've been praying together for 30 something years. Have we agreed along the way on every single thing? No. But the strength and the beauty of that friendship is that we've cultivated it over so many years, and we're both pursuing God wholeheartedly. We've learned how to pray scripture together over our kids and grandkids. And it's beautiful because you need that support as a mother. So I want to jump subjects for just a second, because in your book, you talk a little bit about the church calendar. And I kind of love this, and how can families, like how can parents help their kids understand the church calendar? How does that benefit
Yeah.
kids?
Oh, so good. Well, I think it helps them in so many ways. We're creatures who like habit. We like rhythm. And so we love the sort of the change of seasons and the sort of various liturgies or holidays that mark our lives. I think kids love that stuff more than anybody. And the church calendar is simply a way of saying, what would it look like to re-inhabit the story of Jesus every year together? And I
Okay, so
think
what does that
kids,
look like?
yeah, totally. So it starts with Advent, which is the season that leads up to the birth of Christ. And this is a season of anticipation, right? That we're longing for what we've hoped for. We're longing for God to make things right. And we're in this season of expectant prayer. And gosh, you know, when we try to practice Advent, and it's tough with kids, right? They want Christmas to come now, and
They're
they want
well,
to
and
get.
they're waiting for Santa Claus. So I mean, there's the cultural part, but then there's the biblical part, and I embrace both. But tell us, how do you do that with your kids?
It's tough to practice patience. It's tough to have it's tough to sort of withhold getting everything you want in the moment. And man, talk about a cultural thing. We want to have it now. If it's a good thing, we want it now. So Advent's a time when we try as a family to just practice waiting. And that doesn't mean we don't celebrate at all. We're not going to be like sourpusses about all the Christmas songs that start in October these days. But we try intentionally say, hold on, we're going to save some of that for the 12 days of Christmas, for the season of celebration. Right now, we're waiting for Christ to come, which, by the way, it's not just we're reenacting the story of Israel waiting for the Messiah, but this is where the church is today. We long for Christ to return. So Advent reminds us of the waiting for the first coming of Christ as we continue to wait for his second coming. So, I mean, it's simple things like we there's ways we try to get ready for Christmas together, but not celebrate yet. We light the Advent candles and the wreath, and that's a really easy thing that kids love. The sort of, you can see the candles week by week being lit. We try to prepare our hearts and our homes. So we're about to get all these presents and all these toys. Well, what would it look like to make space for Christ to come? Let's give away some of our old toys that are in decent shape. Let's give them to the thrift store. Let's save some of the money that we might be spending on treats and give that to the soup kitchen. Different ways of sort of saying, how do we make space? It's not just a season of consumption, of gratification, but a season of remembering what we long for. And so I actually think Advent's a really easy one for kids to understand. They can get like, we're getting ready. It hasn't happened yet, but it's coming and it's going to be so great. And so it's a fun one to start with.
Yeah, and then there's Epiphany. So tell us about that.
Yeah, great. So we have an Advent and then the 12 days of Christmas, which is a beautifully long feast. And we try to spread the feasting out a little bit. We save a couple of presents for later, right after the first day of Christmas. And then Epiphany is when Christ, the light of the world, is revealed. Like it's when the wise men come, right? And so the significance of that is that the good news of the gospel has been made known to everyone. The light has shone in the darkness, and it happens in the middle of winter, so it's really appropriate to bright lights and candles. And this is a chance to, as a family, to think about the way in which Christ's light is meant to spread through our whole home, through our hearts, and in our witness to the world. So how can we tell the truth about who Jesus is? How can we tell that through our words and our lives together?
Yeah, I love that, Paul. And so you have the church calendar outlined, and there are some really good ideas. And moms, I want you to get that, because that's a great way to be discipling your kids in your home. Take them through the church calendar, and not just Advent and Epiphany, but then there's Lent and Holy Week and some of these, and Pentecost when the Holy Spirit is given. But these are great marker points for your kids to know. Now, one of the things that you talk about in the book is learning together as a community. So, how do we cultivate within our kids curiosity and wonder so that they want to learn? They don't want to just maybe veg out, you
Oh
know.
my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. I think kids have this natural desire to wonder and to ask questions, but often we kind of squish it out of them, and often it kind of dies a slow death. And, I think one way I actually learned so much from some older parents in our church who I've seen do this well, is asking, oh, right. It's so helpful. Just asking imaginative questions of kids, so, we hear a gospel story read aloud, or we're looking at, we're reading, say, the feeding of the 5,000, right? And I've seen how parents will ask. I think of this one mom, and she'll say, "What do you think it was like to watch the loaves multiplied?" And kids have all kinds of answers to questions like that. Sometimes they're really, really way better than I would think of. But modeling for them that there's so much to wonder at in who Jesus is, and in what God is like, and what it's like to be near Jesus. And so I think asking those kinds of questions, where it's not about I'm trying to get them to know the perfect right answer. I mean, there's a time for that too. But what was it like to be one of the children that Jesus welcomed when the disciples were trying to send them away? What do you think the children felt like? Those sorts of questions, I think, help kids really put words to whatever's going on and the Lord is doing, and drawing them into relationship with Him. And so, good questions is really what I'd start with.
I love that, because I think sometimes Christian parenting can dissolve into behavior modification, right? For our kids, rather than really helping them fall in love with Jesus. And I think one of the things that I personally love about asking your kids imaginative questions is it gives you, as a parent, the opportunity to listen. And listening is a huge spiritual discipline for us as parents and living in community, right? You talk about listening in the book, and how does that help us to become more like Jesus?
Well, it's so interesting how you see in the Gospels, Jesus asks dozens of questions. Yeah, and of course he knows everything, and he doesn't need our answers, but there's something about who God is that he loves to hear his children. I mean, this isn't this what prayer is? Prayer is God saying, "I want to hear." And I think we do. There's no question that we need to lead our children into maturity, that we need to teach them truth. but I think we also spiritually can learn a lot about who God is and who he calls us to be from our kids. I mean, when I watch, our 3-year-old come up in church and hold up his hands, and he wants to receive Christ, and um and he's just waiting, right, with eagerness for um for Christ. I'm learning something about what it means to come to God. Back to the church calendar on this point, in our tradition, on Maundy Thursday, which is right before Good Friday, it's when the Last Supper happens. It's when Jesus washes the disciples' feet. In our church, our priests actually wash everyone's feet at the front of the church. And I remember the first time our eldest went up, and he must have been 2 or 3, and had his feet washed by our minister, and I cried. I mean, I couldn't hold it in, because it just showed for me, like looking at my son's face and seeing his feet be washed, this is how Jesus sees my son. This is how the Lord feels about my son. I'm kind of getting emotional just remembering it, and there's something that I'm learning about being a child of God by listening, by watching my children. And so now that's hard. Those moments are beautiful and sublime, but in the day-to-day life, of course, it's a whole lot of noise. It's a whole lot of 3 people talking at once. But there is, I think, a spiritual discipline there of, if we can find moments to quiet our hearts and to listen, the Lord has something for us too.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, we are out of time, but moms, the name of the book that Paul has written is Practicing Life Together. And what I want you, there's so much that I could point out that you could take away from this conversation, but I want you to hear, you can't do the parenting journey alone. It's just too hard. So find your community, press in even to the challenging moments of that. It's a blessing and also a challenge at different times. Learn to listen, maybe pull out the church calendar and get familiar with that and figure out, like, how can I make this real in my child's life, and take a look at some of these practices that Paul has brought out in his book. The name of the book, again, is Practicing Life Together. It is by Paul Gutacker, and you can find it anywhere Christian books are sold. So we hope you'll get a copy. And Paul, I just want to thank you for being my guest today. And I love that you have 4 kids. And, I love that you talked about inviting singles into your home. I think that's part of the body of Christ that we need to engage in. And even when it's challenging, even when the kids are melting down and going chaotic, just invite people into the mess, because doing life together is so important in God's eyes. So friends, thanks for joining us today on The Connected Mom. And we hope you'll join us again next week for another episode where we'll have another conversation that'll help you to connect with God more deeply, to connect with your fellow moms more empathetically, and to connect with your child more intentionally. Thanks.